Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. You're ready to dive into something different today. We're going to be looking at prayer,
Okay.
but with a bit of a twist. We're going to be exploring how prayer is presented as a tool to shape the relationships of someone close to you,
Hmm.
specifically a spouse.
Interesting.
So buckle up, because the source material for this deep dive is a podcast episode called Praying for Powerful Connections, lifting up our husbands in prayer for life-giving relationships.
Really fascinating angle, for sure. It
Like,
kind of highlights the power of relationships, right?
yeah,
And the role they play in our growth, not just personally,
right.
but also how it relates to our faith and our family.
Totally. And that's what I think is so interesting about this, because it's not simply praying for your spouse's well-being or, whatever.
Uh-huh.
It's like targeted prayer
Yeah.
at shaping their connections with other people. What did you think about that approach?
Well, I thought the episode actually made a really good point by bringing up that proverb, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. And it really made me think about how relationships can have this dual nature of influence,
Yeah.
where the right friendships can uplift and challenge us and then push us towards this positive growth.
It's like having that friend that, really motivates you to kind of reach your full potential.
Exactly. But then on the flip side of that,
Yeah.
the episode also brings up the potential for negative influence.
Oh, right.
And it even references a verse from 1 Corinthians that says, bad company corrupts good morals. So it's not just praying for your spouse to find good company, but also recognizing and potentially addressing those relationships that might be pulling them in a negative direction.
It's almost like proactively trying to create a supportive and positive network for your spouse through prayer.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
But then how does that play out? Is it about like direct intervention, where prayer somehow changes the other person's behavior?
Mm.
Or is it more about fostering discernment in the person being prayed for?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And honestly, I don't think the podcast comes right out and says
Right.
it's really open to interpretation.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting to me, at least, is the underlying belief that prayer can be this powerful force
Okay.
for positive change in relationships,
Yeah.
even if it's indirect.
Yeah, why don't we look at some of the practical examples that the podcast gives? Because they actually offer these very specific prayers for shaping a spouse's relationship.
Yeah, one that stood out to me was the prayer for attracting what they call godly mentors
Okay.
into the husband's life. And it's not just about finding any mentor, but specifically those who will help him strengthen his faith and, kind of discover his purpose.
Right. So it's almost like aligning the spouse with people who embody certain values
Mhm.
and can provide guidance on like a deeper level.
Exactly.
They also talk about praying for protection from negative influences,
Oh.
like almost a shield against harmful relationships.
Yeah, and it's interesting because they don't suggest, trying to control who the spouse interacts with. Instead, there's a prayer for guidance in choosing the right connections,
Yeah.
implying this hope that the spouse will develop the wisdom to make those choices for themselves.
It's not about dictating friendships,
Right.
but rather seeking guidance and discernment for your spouse.
Exactly. The prayers reveal a desire for the husband to be surrounded by individuals who uplift him,
Yeah.
encourage his spiritual development, and ultimately help him lead a more fulfilling life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What strikes you most about this approach?
Well, I think what's fascinating is this idea that by praying for specific outcomes in your spouse's relationships, you're kind of expressing this deep desire for their well-being and their growth, but you're also entrusting a higher power to guide the whole process.
It speaks to a sense of like trust and surrender,
Yes.
recognizing that you can't control everything, but you can kind of align your intentions with a higher purpose
Right.
and have faith that things will unfold as they should.
I-
And it makes you wonder if this approach to prayer can be applied to a spouse's relationships. Could it extend even further?
Oh, absolutely.
Could it be applied to other relationships in our lives?
For sure. That's a really interesting part, and it leads us perfectly into the next section.
Let's unpack that further.
Yeah.
So we've been talking about this idea of praying for your spouse's relationships and how that can shape them.
Mm.
But, it really makes you think,
Yeah.
could we apply this same concept to other connections in our lives?
Mm.
Like praying for our children's friends or our parents' social circles or even our own work relationships.
Yeah, it is a powerful thought. If we believe that prayer can have a positive influence, then why would we limit it to just romantic relationships?
Right.
Imagine the impact it could have if we extend that to our children's friendships. guiding them towards positive influences and protecting them from negative ones.
Right, like we're creating this supportive web around our loved ones through prayer.
Exactly.
But would that be a form of control, though? Like, are we trying to dictate who they connect with?
Well, that's where the nuance comes in, right? It's not about dictating friendships, but about fostering discernment and creating an environment where healthy relationships can thrive.
Okay.
Think of it like tending a garden. You can't force a plant to grow in a certain direction,
Right.
but you can create the conditions for it to flourish.
So we're providing the right environment,
Yeah.
but ultimately allowing individuals to make their own choices.
Yeah.
So does that mean then that prayer is more about aligning our intentions with a higher purpose
Mm-hmm.
and trusting that things will just work out for the best?
Exactly. Prayer is not about demanding specific outcomes or manipulating situations.
Yeah.
It's about surrendering our worries and anxieties to a higher power, trusting that guidance and support will be provided.
Mm. Can you think of a time when you saw this in action? Like maybe where you witnessed a friend who really blossomed because of a positive relationship?
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I think what's important to remember in the situations is that no one forced that connection. They were open to it, and the environment just kind of supported it.
Right. But I'm sure some people listening were thinking, well, if prayer really worked that way,
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't everyone just be surrounded by amazing people all the time?
Mm-hmm.
How do you respond to that for people who are skeptical?
It's a valid question. It highlights the importance of understanding that prayer isn't like a magic formula
Right.
or a quick fix.
Yeah.
It's a practice of faith, and faith requires patience and trust. We may not always see the results we expect or, on the timeline that we want.
So it's about having faith in the process
Right.
and acknowledging that change may not always happen overnight or in the way that we could predict,
Yeah,
but we just have to trust that a higher power is working things out, even if we don't understand how.
exactly. And it's important to remember that we also have a responsibility to play our part.
Uh-huh.
Prayer can be a source of guidance and strength, but ultimately it's up to each person to make choices that align with their values and
Yeah.
to nurture those connections that bring them joy and fulfillment.
As we go deeper into this, it occurs to me that we're not just talking about shaping someone else's relationships.
Right.
We're also reflecting on our own connections and the impact they have on us.
That's such an important point.
Yeah.
As we consider praying for others, it also kind of prompts us to look at our own relationships.
Yeah.
Are we the kind of friend, family member, or colleague that we hope others will be to us?
Right.
Are we creating a positive and supportive space for the people in our lives?
It's a good reminder that personal growth and transformation are often intertwined with the quality of our relationships.
Yeah.
By fostering positive connections in our own lives,
Mm-hmm.
we create this ripple effect that extends outward, impacting those around us.
Absolutely. And, as we kind of wrap up this part of our deep dive, I think it's good to leave our listeners with this question. If you were to apply this idea of praying for relationships beyond just, romantic partnerships, how might prayer be used to shape the connections of friends, family members, or even colleagues? It's a challenge for sure. To consider the potential power of prayer and how it can shape those relationships around us.
Uh-huh.
And not just for our own benefit, but for the well-being of those that we care about the most. So where do we go from here?
Wow.
It's like we've discovered this secret weapon,
Mhm.
a way to influence the world around us for good.
Huh.
Like if we really believe that prayer can impact relationships, it really makes you wonder about its potential to create positive change on a larger scale.
Yeah,
That's a nice thought.
it is. It goes back to that proverb about iron sharpening iron.
Right.
Maybe by praying for those around us, we're not just supporting them, but we're kind of contributing to this collective sharpening, this
Mhm.
elevation of our community.
Yeah. It's a good reminder that we're all interconnected. The quality of our relationships impacts not just our own lives, but it ripples outwards.
Right.
It influences our families, our communities, society as a whole.
So it's almost like praying for someone else's relationships is an act of service.
Uh-huh.
Not just for that person, but for everyone.
For the collective good.
Yeah.
And this perspective challenges us to view prayer not as this solitary practice, but as something that can really connect us more deeply to one another
Right.
and, create a more harmonious world.
This has been such an eye-opener for me, I have to say.
Yeah, me too.
I think I've always thought of prayer as this personal thing, but it can be this powerful tool to really build bridges and strengthen our communities.
I agree. It's definitely broadened my own understanding of prayer and challenged me to think about its potential impact in some new ways.
Yeah, and I hope our listeners feel that same way. Maybe this will spark some new conversations about prayer.
Uh-huh.
Maybe it'll inspire someone to approach their own prayer practice with a new sense of purpose and possibility.
Absolutely. Whatever the takeaway, I think it's safe to say that this deep dive has really opened our eyes to a whole new dimension of prayer
Yeah.
and its potential to influence not just our lives, but the lives of everyone around us in some really profound and meaningful ways.
Well said. So as we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with this thought. Whether you're someone who prays all the time or you're just starting out, remember this. Every prayer, no matter how big or small, has the potential to make a difference. So keep praying, keep believing, and keep trusting in that power of connection to create a more loving and compassionate world. Thanks for listening. I